even though they're sweep strokes, they're rather welcome boundaries for Somerset.
Yes, they are indeed, most certainly. It takes James Hill to the dizzy heights of 27. The score is now escalated to 68 for 2. So it's looking, from a statistical point of view, far more... a far healthier scoreline than was the case at 28 for 2, whatever it was. 27 overs bowled to date, and Somerset are a mere 332 behind Lancashire on first innings, coming towards tea on the third day's play.
Well, it's all about points really at the moment. Of course, Chappell, the stand-up bowler in a lot of ways, 10 overs, 4 maidens, 2 for 15. Hogg 8 overs, 4 maidens, 0 for 14, but he bowled beautifully. Both have got economy rates of 1.5 runs and over, as Mahmood runs in now to Compton, and he bowls, and that's down the leg side. Compton shaping to play that away, but decides to stay inside of the ball and let it go through to the wicket-keeper for no run. And it gets a little bit shade darker again as we look out to those Pegasus new Pegasus apartments over there to the left of our commentary box, where many's a time one's seen Trescothick hoik a massive 6 up the top there, and the other day Prince managed to hit one right up at the top in hospitality on the Sir Ian Botham stand. It was quite a massive stroke down the ground off Dockwell, as that's bowled outside the off stump, and nice delivery from Mahmood, but the batsman Compton went back and played a lovely correct backward defensive stroke to that man at backward point.
Do you know, before the Ian Botham stand was erected, had it been erected in 1988, all the sixes that Graham Hicks struck during his 405 not out would not otherwise have now been lying in a right sort of mess at the bottom of the River Tone.
Well, what a knock that must have been. I'd love to have seen that.
One of the finest innings I've ever seen.
Well, of course, along with Brian Lara's 400 as Mahmood bowls, and that's on the leg stump, forced away by Hildreth, but up to the mid-on fielder there, Compton, and there's no run. It's a nice on drive. Fairly well timed, but it went up to that mid-on field. I'd love to have seen Lara's knock. It was 94. I've seen old footage of it, but I think it was 94. Was it 95? He's 400.
Yeah, he made 375.
500, wasn't it?
Yeah, he made 375.
And then the 400 in 2004.
Against England in April the 18th, 1994. Then 400.
500 that he hit in county cricket.
10 years to the day afterwards, that 400 came.
Mahmood bowls, and that's outside the off stump, and again, Compton shapes to force that away, but doesn't. Thinks about a 1, but they decide against, and there's no run.
Yes, it was April the 18th, 1994. He scored his 375 not out against England at Kingston at Antigua, and he did so 10 years to the day against the same opposition on the same ground.
Extraordinary, really.
Quite remarkable. And
with a player really like that, that's undoubtedly better than anybody else on each side, it seems all the more odd that West Indies didn't win a test in that series, as Mahmood runs in again, bustles in and bowls outside the off stump, and there's no run. But again, so much with West Indies cricket is politics and problems off the pitch, which kind of spoil things, selections and everything else, but hopefully they'll sort it out. Cause,
it's like Pakistan. I mean, Pakistan really have had so much talent, and
I see that Mohammed Yusuf is thinking of coming back, or wants to come back.
Well, I think that'd be marvellous. I think they've done so well, given all the travails and tribulations they've had to endure. I think they're a very fine test side, Pakistan.
Oh, they're extraordinary. As Mahmood kicks his heels and runs in again. Pretty quick a ball this is, I reckon, and it's played on the stumps nicely by Compton, who plays it down in front of him off the middle of the blade. And there's no run. That's a lovely forward defensive, not troubling him at all, that delivery, though it was a little bit quicker, I fancy. So, yes, it is interesting when you look at different players, and certainly when we speak of Lara, of course, Bravo, who is distantly related from the same village as well in Trinidad, and they both have exactly the same averages after the same amount of tests. I think it's after 12, 13 tests, though Bravo was due the 375 in this test that just gone, and it didn't happen. He got 45, so perhaps that's going to change, but it was almost absolutely extraordinary. They had exactly the same averages, and of course distantly related and look similar. Really odd, but that's our great game. It does come up with some unusual, baffling, somewhat unsettling things occasionally.
I'm going to baffle you in a bit by asking you when on earth the tea interval is due to be scheduled, because we've been playing almost 2 hours, and I'm assuming...
6 o'clock.
it's coming up relatively imminently.
Kerrigan bowls again, and that's a flatter one on the off stump, slightly short, and that's forced away for a quick single, pass backward point, and they run that pretty quickly. Brings back Compton to face. It's well run by Hildreth, and Kerrigan here. Interesting bowler. Nice to have a view of him. I know that there's some that believe he should be looked at by England. Typical number 11 apparently, and pretty adequate fielder. Flights that one up, and that's well played by Compton. Bat and pad close together, and there's no run. Goes over to the cover fielder, and Dockrell was flighting everything up for Somerset, and I found he's not quite flighting it as much as Dockrell was. Kerrigan, who bowls again, that's again on off stump, and there's no run. Nice forward defensive there, and interesting field. We've got mid-off, mid-on, we've got a short mid-wicket, we've got an extra cover, got a backward point, just the one slip, a short leg and a fine leg, as Kerrigan once again wheels in across the umpire, bowls, and that's quite a slightly flatter one, I fancy, and again he plays that nicely. Compton, everything together, head over the ball, textbook, copybook stroke really, what the coaches always teach you to do, head over the ball, blade downward, and short leg waits expectantly as Kerrigan flights that a bit more, but that's on more like the leg stump, and that's played straight down the wicket though by Compton. And there's no run again as Kerrigan picks it up and shines the ball. It's pretty dark here again. Getting gloomy as Kerrigan comes in and bowls, and that's slightly more flighted and takes us outside edge of the bat. And there's no run, goes past first slip, it's fielded by backward point. Kerrigan makes a little noise as that edge was found, and hand to the head a little bit, but there was no chance of that going to hand. It went way past first slip with no trouble, and there was even thoughts of a quickly scrambled single for a second there, but it would have been suicide if they had. And that's the end of the over. It's 69 for 2, Hildreth on 28 and Compton on 18.
You know, it's just dawned on me, I hadn't realised that Gary Keady appears not to be in the 11 if the scorecard I'm looking at is correct. But he's a very fine player too. And
I don't think he is. I mean, he's another one that I know, a lot of people feel should have been considered by England, but there's only so many spots in England's side, aren't there? But Mahmood now is running in again, bounding in quite quickly here, past the umpire, bowls, and that's on the stumps and played away round the corner down to fine leg, and they take a quick single. And just the two slips, backward point, cover fielder, mid-off, mid-on. That's a fine leg and a square leg and a short mid-wicket as well. And the clouds loom in the distance, but no great...
it's actually getting brighter despite there are more clouds, interestingly.
It's a kind of deep cover point really there on the boundary on the offside, as well as he bowls Mahmood, and that's forced away, and they run for a quick single as there's a misfield there by the cover fielder there, and they take a quick single as a result, as the ball bounds back into the wicket-keeper's fluorescent bright green gloves. Cross there, and they take a single. So the score goes up to 70 for 2 now. So this is a period of real stability for Somerset when you remember where they were at 28 for 2 after lunch. These two have done a fine job, and Compton's on 19 and Hildreth 29. So both playing really well at the moment and concentrating hard as Hildreth faces that and goes back, forces it sweetly away to that chap on the deep extra cover boundary, and they take a single. And that was nicely timed, because he only got the single, but it went right to the man on the boundary. It was right on the boundary, in front of those flats there, the Pegasus apartments, which were built in recent years. Been a lot of development, of course, at Taunton. And yes, let's hope Mahmood comes in again and reaches the umpire and bowls, and that's not a great delivery, and it's a beautiful stroke, beautifully stroked away there for 4 runs. Extra cover drive, imperiously played, and sweetly timed by Compton off the middle of the bat for 4 runs. Lovely stroke.
That really was the shot of the day.
It was. I mean, it's one of those strokes, it's almost in slow motion. It was beautifully played, everything correct, held the bat in place as the bat came through, held the pose, and went off to the extra cover boundaries very, very sweetly. Beautiful stroke. And lovely extra cover drive there by Compton, who waits again as Mahmood bowls, and that's this time off the outside edge for another 4 runs, and goes into the boundary boards now. And 4 runs, they're not really a full stroke. It was off the outside edge, but I fancy it was played sort of down. Good technique there from Compton to make sure that it wouldn't go to slip, and it was run down for 4 runs, but a slight moral victory there perhaps for the bowler. So an expensive over so far from Mahmood. 2 lovely 4s in a row, well, one of them was a beautiful stroke, the other one perhaps not quite so convincing, as he waits again for Mahmood, who bowls, and that's outside the off stump, but this time is left all alone. Yes, our commentary box is up in the old pavilion, which has got an interesting history, of course, and been here so many years, and of course Gimlet Hill as well to our left, in the old familiar church, which of course is the one constant that will never change, with all the different alterations in the ground.
Yes, it's quite interesting because the Colin Atkinson Pavilion, the redevelopment of the Colin Atkinson Pavilion has ensured, I mean, that was the previous pavilion, that was the old new pavilion, whereas we're in the old pavilion, old pavilion.
Right.
Now you've got the Andrew Caddick Pavilion to our right. And
that's fairly new as well.
It's very new. It went up very, very quickly, of course.
Wasn't it last year, I think?
As Keegan bowls the next delivery.
Kevin Keegan.
I'm sorry. Yes, Kerrigan. All the K's. Kerrigan.
Keegan.
Kerrigan bowls the first delivery. That's played out in defence to extra cover to Ashwell Prince, and there's no run. Left arm round the wicket, bowling through the umpire, and Hildreth plays immaculately back on his stumps this time in defensive mode, quite prepared to bide his time. Always very recognisable figure is James Hildreth, because he has his pads as it were pointing outwards. If you could stand behind him, his leg, rather like Derek Underwood's feet would always point outwards as the next delivery is left on the outside. They'll stump and there's no run. Yes, the Derek Underwood's sort of, I don't know, had the sort of pigeon toe effect. Well, James Hildreth is like that with his pads. They sort of jut outwards, as it were. As the next delivery from Kerrigan is played in defence off the back foot, back to the bowler. There is no run scored. Whereas Javed Meander had always, his pads are funny things. His pads always ended up kind of going inwards. As the next delivery is full in length and it's played only as far as the man at short mid-wicket, and there is no run taken.
I would have thought, by the way, regarding tea, that as we started half an hour earlier than normal after lunch, one would assume, well, yes, it may well be half an hour later, perhaps around 4 o'clock.
The next delivery is played off the pads as far as Sajid Mahmood at mid-on, and there is no run scored. Yes, pads are funny things. You know, these days with the Velcro pads, it's much easier to put them on.
Yeah.
But if you overstretch the straps, then the Velcro becomes, as it were, unattainable. What you don't have, of course, now is the hideous buckle pads of many moons.
I think I've still got a pair of those somewhere.
When you played at prep school, when you played at school level, and you had shorts on or your socks came down, and they'd rub against your legs, it was and they weren't very protective either.
No, they actually. It's Proctor coming on, Proctor from this end.
It's Proctor from this end. But these days pads are so much lighter, and yet they're seen 3 or 4 times as thick, far more substantial than pads were years ago. And of course, Tony Gregg was the great protagonist with batting gloves, trying out the St. Peter's glove. You know, in the 1970s, the age of experimentation in the 1970s, and now we had the sort of fat sausage gloves, but now batting gloves these days are honed with engineering capacity, you know, the skills required to produce them, they're marvellous things, as opposed to the traditional spiky green gloves we had going to about 1880.
Seeing the old photographs, when you look at the old footage,
with the holes in the pads, you know, watching the cricketers from the 1880s, and very thin little bats with no great power to them. Anyway, it's Proctor now resuming from the old pavilion end, and it's short, but it's played in defence, but sufficient time for Compton to play the ball out to a deepish point position and take himself a single. The score now goes to 80. Compton's 28, not out. James Hillruth 30. The two have now added 43. We're in the 32nd over of Somerset's reply to Lancashire's 400 all out on the third day of the LB County Championship match at Taunton. Somerset's third game of the season, first-class County Championship game of the season. And Lancashire's likewise as Proctor passed umpire Bainton right on with the wicket, and that's outside the off stump. Relatively straight, but it's left alone and there is no run scored. The evolution of cricket equipment is quite fascinating.
It is.
If you look at the helmets, you were talking about helmets earlier on, one still feels that the helmets worn by Graham Yallop and others in the 1970s, he was one of the first to wear a helmet
as well, wasn't there? Or?
Well, Graham Yallop's helmet was the traditional see-through helmet, as it were, see-through visor, which I think is safer than the visors which have the grills, because the ball can still get stuck, or as the next delivery is bowled outside the off stump and it's played defensively forward to mid-off and there is no run. You know, the helmets, obviously they're lighter, they have greater propensity to add inner protection, because it's rather like a suit of armour. You don't want something that's very heavy, and it protects you ostensibly from being struck, but the resonance of the blow can actually cause damage from inside, as it were. So that's been addressed as well by engineers. As the next delivery from Proctor is on the pad, and it's not far away. It's gone! It's gone! My goodness me, it wasn't far away at all. I thought perhaps it was a fraction high, but it was clearly on middle and off stump. It looked absolutely adjacent to me, but just a query or a question mark regarding the height. Just a question mark. I think it may have been a fraction too high. It was above the roll, or half above the roll.
We could do the DRS, couldn't we?
Hillruth was only half forward. That was, I think, that that was the decisive factor. He was only half forward. It wasn't a shuffle forward, but it was by no means a convincing forward movement to the front pad. The front leg, and one of those which I thought could easily have been given not out.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the umpire thought about it there. He took some time over the decision, and it's
unless he's cold and wants to get in for a cup of tea and whistles through the batting order like a dose of salts. I don't know. I think you'd have to say that James Hillruth was unlucky. I'm not saying it was palpably not out, but it was one of those that was marginal.
Now Craig Keysweather comes in with, in the background, the Andrew Caddick Pavilion. You can see the lights quite brightly in there upstairs.
Yeah, the lights quite again.
Dark again.
But you see, it changes the whole equation. You see, here I was quite relaxed and comfortable in the score of being 81 for 2, and now it's 81 for 3, and all of a sudden the balance shifts.
It does, yeah. I mean, with Keysweather coming in, I mean, he's one of those batsmen that, when one watches him, he's quite unconventional. But when he gets it right, he can be really entertaining to watch. But one just hopes here that he can get to tea, because he at the beginning of the innings he can be a little bit of a nervous starter, but we shall see how things pan out as he gets ready to face.
And of course James Hillruth was batting so well. I think of the two, he was the more convincing, the more authoritative of the two batsmen out there on this particular occasion. But I think he was unlucky. I think even now, looking back at that dismissal in my mind, I begin to feel that he's unluckier than ever, really. I thought that the Sajid Mahmood LBW shout, the Yorker from a few overs ago, that was absolutely plumb, and that was given not out. That was plumb. And I have to say, when they went up for the LBW decision here, there was a slight delay. I'm not entirely sure that the fielders were completely convinced. Anyway, Proctor, with this very sort of fascinating little action he's got coming in to bowl the Craig Keysweather, it's a little flip, a little flick of the right arm. It's part Malcolm Marshall. But it's almost a little idiosyncrasy, a little kink, not when he's bowling.
It reminds me of, there was a bowler for Worcestershire a few years ago called Phil Newport.
Oh, yes,
he used to do this little stutter with his left arm as he came to the bowling action just before delivery, where his left arm would sort of jolt and waggle about a bit. And Proctor does something very similar. It almost looks like he's going to fall over.
The next delivery is outside the off-stump, very wide this time, and that's a poor delivery, and it's taken by a cross, and there's no run. Keysweather ample time to watch it go through and evaluate the movement in the air. But the other interesting thing about dear old Proctor here is that bless him, I mean, he has a rather high forehead, I suppose is a polite way, but he rather reminds me in some ways of, he looks not dissimilar facially to Bill Athey.
Bill Athey, yeah. I remember Bill. Yeah, he's a good player.
Actually, yet another man we could add to our list of those who should have played far more for England.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of batsmen, the summer of 1988, of course, with the West Indies, we went through a lot of batsmen ended their careers that year.
4 captains in a year.
A bit like in 1984.
And someone like Jack Richards, who came from Surrey, did ever so well in the 86-87 tour, scored 100 at Perth, and was never seen again. Next to him from Kerrigan is outside the off stump, and it's turns a fraction, but it allows the batsman Nick Compton to play it only in defence as far as the man at point, who picks up, returns it to the in-off field Ashwell Prince. No run results as a seagull circumnavigates just in front of the Ian Botham stand, decides he's had a look and is heading off for tea, and the next delivery is played botfree forward in defence, and there's no run. The clock strikes 3:30 as a black taxi drives over the bridge in front of us here at the Priory Road end of the ground. So it's still, I always think it's...
And is left alone by the batsman again, having nothing to do with that. And yeah, you'd say it was definitely Lancashire's session still at present. I don't think Somerset can claim any brevity over the situation as such, as that's again played forward beautifully by Compton, bat and pad closely together. It's getting darker again. There's Horton at slip. There's just the one slip, and there's a short leg who's pretty close as Kerrigan comes in again, loops in, and that's short, and he goes back to cut it, but there's a chap there at backward point who moves across, and again there's no run. So yes, it's interesting what you're talking about with those mattings. That sounds quite dangerous to bat on.
Well, you see, as Ricky Ponting pointed out, as you said, Ben, wickets are all the same. There's no pace at Sabina Park anymore, no pace at the Wacker, no pace at the Oval, no pace at Taunton.
Kerrigan again floats that one up, flights it, but again played forward. It's certainly true.
Trent Bridge, you see.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you remember the dust bowls of Delhi and you going to Sabina Park, these wickets that are almost like glass, but players could virtually see themselves in the wicket, without a blade of grass on them, and to be honest, that's not the case anymore. Wickets tend to be very similar worldwide, apart from, as I say, the subcontinent, but even they're not as different as they once were, you could argue, as Compton goes back and plays that, but doesn't play it very convincingly, and it goes out on the offside. And just for a second, the fielder there it's a sort of silly point fielder there, went across to have a go at catching that, and Compton is quite crowded now. He's got a short leg, and a chap just did a silly point fielder there, and kind of dived to his left. That's Ashwell Prince as it gets darker again, and that's a kind of very full delivery, almost like a Yorker from the spinner, which is dug out by Compton, who, well, as you say, really almost Yorked himself. That could have easily have been a catch to the short leg or the silly point fielder. So that's the end of the over. It's 83 for 3. Keyswetter is still not out. He's been in a little while now. There's been 35 overs gone. We got the last wicket was of course at 81, so only 2 runs put on. It's getting very dark out there now as I speak. There's been 3 extras in this innings thus far, and of course Hildreth was on 30, did all that hard work getting to that score, and really when you get to that stage you'd look to go on and get a half century, maybe more, as Proctor bowls, and again Keyswetter goes forward really nicely. Everything correct about that one, and there's no runs. So we've got Sajid Mahmood, who took out of the attack in the end, who was unlucky not to get that wicket at LBW. He's at mid-off. There's a mid-on, there's a square leg, there's a fine leg, and there's an extra cover, there's a backward point, a gully, 2 slips as Proctor bowls, and he drives Keyswetter, but far from convincingly. He gets an inside edge onto the pad, and that dribbles out, and cover point runs across, scurries in to collect that, and Proctor, of course, with this, as I say, slightly Newport-esque type stuttered delivery just before he gets to the point of delivery, where that left arm kind of juts around, and it's a very open bowling action. And Keyswetter, also quite unconventional in a way, has his bat lifted, but plays that very conventionally. Nice forward defensive, bat and pad closely together, and there's no run. He walks off toward square leg and has a survey of the field. We've got not great conditions here, has to be said, but we've been lucky. We haven't had any more rain this afternoon. It kept away. It was kind of drizzling still at midday, but we've been playing since 1:10 now. It's 20-4. It's been quite a long session as Proctor bowls again, and that gets skewed off the outside edge. The fielder there in the gully dives across Ashwell Prince and saves possibly a couple of runs. And in the end, there's no runs in the end synopsis. Those fielders seemingly quite close together when they were running across to field that backward point and gully, as Mahmood throws it to Proctor, having no doubt given the ball a good polish. And Proctor once again, quite quickly, not hanging around here, runs in again, reaches the umpire and bowls, and again outside the off stump, balloon bounce really, and goes up, and Keysweather having nothing to do with that. Objective being, I guess, at this stage, just to get to tee, no more wickets down, and Somerset can then have a good think about the longer strategy. Tomorrow's weather, of course, we're not sure what's going to happen. It doesn't look good, so really it's all about points. Lancashire, of course, were bowled out for exactly 400, getting 6 bonus points there, and it's 83 for 3 as Proctor bowls again, reaches the umpire, he bowls, and that's outside the off stump again. Keysweather having nothing to do with that one, and it's now tee. So Keysweather manages to get to the close without losing his wicket, which is a relief for him, and a thoroughly absorbing afternoon's cricket really. It's been very interesting from a number of perspectives. There's some attractive stroke play from Compton and Hildreth, but also they were reined in by some good bowling, particularly from Chappell, the season campaigner. He bowled extremely well, and I think, Julian, it's been an interesting game of cat and mouse between the two teams, but you'd have to say at the moment that Lancashire are on top, but there's obviously no chance of a result in this game.
No, indeed not. I certainly Lancashire bowled superbly well. Kyle Hogg, I think, for me, was the pick of the 3 bowlers.
Yes, yeah.
Glenn Chappell bowled almost as well, but the conditions are so hugely and inevitably in favour of the bowling side, given the time of year and also the inclement weather we have had for the best part of a month now.
Yes, yeah.
Again, throwing into wide open debate this whole issue of why the ECB chooses to cram county championship matches into the start of the season and bung a few more at the end, and then stick a load of 2020 matches and all the Mickey Mouse kind of, it's just, you think of the championship as being the halcyon representation of professional cricket in this country, and it's simply tagged on at the beginning and the end of the season with little else thrown into mid-season, when either we're getting autumn rains or in this case we're getting spring weather. And my heart goes out to the umpires. It goes out to all those poor chaps who are having to play cricket in temperatures where it would have been a good day for rugby, really. Yeah, yes, you're quite right. I mean, in terms of this game, Lancashire have played extremely well. They've been fortunate in that they haven't had to face a front-line Somerset attack, who I thought acquitted themselves exceedingly well, given the situation that many of our youngsters found themselves in.
Particularly yesterday morning, of course, after the poor first day.
It must be said that there is an inevitable superiority within the Lancashire bowling attack. Well, they've got vast experience, of course. They are current holders of the county championship pennant, as it were. I just think, had it been 83 for 2 rather than 83 for 3, well, you could have said it was on balance.
More or less even, Stevens, at that point, I think, indeed.
See, the only thing I think one can really hope for, you say points, quite rightly, it's a points scenario now, but I think we're looking here now to... if there were some way in which we could confound the weather critics, the weathermen, the Met Office, we by rights we ought not to have had the almost entire day's play we had on day one. Poor old Bristol, Gloucestershire, I'm not even sure whether we've seen any play at all during the course of that particular game for the 3 days it's been running. And similarly, Surrey again have been dominated by dreadful weather conditions, so we've done very well in that regard. But it's hard to see any conclusive conclusion, as it were, to this game. Actually, I've just seen one raindrop on the window in front of me.
Oh, goodness me. Well, we have been fortunate in getting the play in that we've had.
if temperature is the gauge by which we can assess the extent to which the rain is going to come or not, as the case may be, then as my feet are currently like a box of ice, that only suggests, and looking at the groundsmen who are dressed in sort of Antarctic overalls, you can almost imagine looking at they're sweeping the wicket, and you've got this sort of mental sort of image of Titus Oates and Edgar Evans and Captain Scott and Bertie Bowers, constructing their base camp at One Ton Depot sometime during the 1912 rather than 2012. You can just imagine them getting ready now for the next flurry of ice and snow and temperatures of -40. And that's really how it sort of feels here.
Well, imagine what it was like for the cricketers. Goodness me.
So I have to say, I'm not
worse for them.
in any way empathetic towards the TMS team in Sri Lanka. Not so in any way whatsoever. And the shore, the proof of the pudding isn't just to the fact that the groundsmen are now jumping up and down to keep warm, but that ominously all the deck chairs to our left that have become a sort of mini landmark have been mysteriously removed because, strangely enough, no one's basking out in the sunshine today.
Well, it's not a very. It's got to be honest. It's not very packed Taunton today. It's not a big crowd, to put it lightly. It's got a nice little attendance, but it's hardly surprising really on a day like this. It's
not at all.
It's not easy for spectators or cricketers really. It's very cold. There's a number of spectators that have got blankets around them, and it must be hard for them out there. It really must be, but very tough, but in very trying conditions.
And we shall be joining them shortly. So it's 83-3 at tea on the third day of the LB County Championship match between Somerset and Lancashire at Taunton. All this in reply to Lancashire's 400 all out today, very symmetrically precise. The 400 was reached, the maximum batting points were attained, and the game appears to be going not very far, not very quickly, but one never knows.
I'll just quickly run through the scorecard before we go. Sapphire bowled Chapel, of course, for 5. Gregory caught Horton bowled Chapel 15. Compton not out 30. Hildreth LBW bowled Proctor for 30. And Keyswetter not out 0. There's been 2 no balls and 1 low by. 3 extras. It's 83 for 3 after 36 overs, and we await to see possible resumption of play after tea. We shall see.
Thank you, Ben. Well, that's time for us to sign off for our cup of tea. So Ben Manning and myself, Julian Cattanach, will leave you in the knowledge that, weather permitting, things will resume in the next 10 minutes or so. We're going to find somewhere a little warmer and then hand over the microphones to men of physically more robust physique to endure the inclement conditions.
Causing some hilarity in the background here.
In the meantime, we'll watch Captain Scott sweeping the wicket there in preparation for the entertainment to come. But
not Captain Cook, then. That's England. Wrong team.
I hope you've enjoyed our commentary here. We do try and entertain you in more ways merely than commentary, and we'll endeavour to keep going, even if all goes pear-shaped on the weather front. We'll endeavour to try and get something to you. So wherever you may be around the world, we wish you all the best and look forward to your presence after the tea interval in 10 minutes. So a very good afternoon to you now.
Indeed. Good afternoon. Goodbye.
Optimistic at the moment. And interestingly enough, of course, the weather's always going to play a hand in cricket, it's bound to. And it can be very exciting when the weather can interfere with cricket and the way matches shape up and results occur. But the
Duckworth-Lewis and the like.
But the problem is, of course, we've got... let's assume for a moment, and I shall probably ask you for an update in a minute, Ben, if I may, regarding the other county scores.
Indeed.
If there were no play here today, and if this match were a draw, it becomes much more significant to other counties, and the likes of the Surrey-Sussex game, the Nottinghamshire-Worcestershire game, particularly, with regard to any positive result that may ensue. I don't know what the weather conditions currently are at the Oval, where Surrey are playing Sussex, or indeed at Trent Bridge, where Nottinghamshire are playing Worcestershire. But it's difficult to know exactly where. Obviously we had a very bad start last year, but no one wants to see a wet, rain-affected draw here. And I'm not saying we're going to. We may get 3 relatively dry days. A result may ensue. But these sort of issues do play a part in shaping the start of the season and providing the moral boost that all the counties will want to receive by getting a win under their belts at the start of the season. Now, another raindrops has struck the commentary box windows here. Remember, the ground staff waddles.
Yes, he's not waddling quite as much as those ducks, is he?
But he doesn't look desperately full of vim and vigour, does he?
No. It's a shame. You wish they had a big screen or something and we were able to watch the test match. Or something, though it's interesting that may cause a bit of an impasse between the MCC and the ICC. This, I don't know, this whole business with the switch hit, because I think it's perfectly legal apparently, but the umpires don't feel it is. So interesting to see what happens with that little scenario, because as opposed to, to Peterson and to Flower, it's simply a case of, well, it's legal, so we'll do it. So it seems a bit of an unusual situation, really, to put it lightly, but we'll see how it develops. But yes, the county scores are happening. I'll be happy to go into those in a second. We've got Derbyshire versus Northamptonshire. We've got, let's see, Derbyshire County Championship Division 2. Derbyshire are 35 for 3 after 16 overs. We've got Essex a 60 for 1 versus Gloucestershire. Leicestershire 35 for 4 versus Glamorgan. Nottinghamshire are 30 for 4 versus Worcestershire. And Surrey 33 for 2. And also, but Kent are doing okay. They're 57 for no wickets, so that's broken the trend somewhat there. But
what you're really saying is, I have to eat my words here. I've always been a chap, as you know, who's inclined to, if in the event of winning a toss under almost any conditions, either A, winning the toss, or B, thinking about it, A, winning the toss and batting, B, thinking about it, and then and still batting. But clearly, the ball, not surprisingly, given the conditions which I guess of this sort prevailing throughout most of the country. Indeed. It's a bit of a bowler's dream. Now, let me raise one issue with you, Ben. I was discussing this the other day, and it's something that has been, as it were, sort of just mooted, not to any great extent as far as one is aware, but this issue of leg buys.
Right.
There was a school of thought that suggested that clearly when a bowler bowls a wide, it's the bowler's fault and so on. When the keeper misses the ball, it's buys. But there are those who suggested that the leg buy should be dispatched and done away with because it's not actually hit by the batsman's glove or bat, so it's not a run.
Right.
It's not to the bowler's betterment or to his detriment. So do you think there's some scope potentially for the leg buy to be phased out, or is that not?
I'm not sure. I wouldn't phase it out personally. I think that it should encourage a bowler to keep a good line and length and not sort of bowl too much rubbish down the leg side. So I assume that's why that rule's always been there. And you could argue, well, it shouldn't be any more of a penalty than it is to the bowler. But I don't know. I mean, getting rid of it would be a bit. I'm not so sure. I mean, in a way, as I say, it keeps the bowlers disciplined. I suppose is one of the many things that keeps them disciplined. So I'm not sure I'd get rid of it. But then I wouldn't have got rid of the runner either, because I think if a batsman has batted beautifully to get to 159 not out and then gets a terrible Yorker on his foot and can barely walk, it seems wrong that he can't call for a runner when he's batted really well all day, he or she has batted really well all day, and then has to hobble off simply because runners aren't allowed, and then a collapse happens as a result, which wouldn't have happened if you'd had a runner, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
So to me, that it could be absolutely disastrous in a match. Imagine if you've got a Boycott or a Chanderpaul grinding away all day, and suddenly they get hit, break their toe, and they're just about to possibly win you a Test match, and then number 8, 9, 10 Jack fall, and you'd be pretty annoyed,